Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow. Welcome to Paranormal Yacker. My guest on today's show is Elliot Van Dusen. I'll be talking with him about his book, Supernatural Encounters, True Paranormal Accounts from Law Enforcement. Elliot Van Dusen, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
Thanks very much, Dan, and thanks for having me on the show.
After 15 years of service, Elliot, you retired as a corporal with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and you've been investigating the paranormal for over 20 years. So, quite obviously, your interest in the paranormal precedes your career with law enforcement. What initially sparked your interest in the paranormal?
It was television shows such as Unsolved Mysteries that kind of captured my attention. I always had an interest in law enforcement and paranormal. Unsolved Mysteries was a combination of both. It wasn't until probably 1997 or so when the X-Files came out that got me interested in investigating the paranormal. It got some academic background in it. Then I joined the RCMP. I kind of came out of the limelight, I guess, while I was doing law enforcement, focused, mostly on that. And then once I retired, kind of started coming back into the paranormal publicly, and yeah, I enjoy it and love talking about it.
Since people involved in law enforcement are trained to deal only in facts, with what they can see, with what they can prove, how did those you interviewed for your book explain the reactions and feelings when confronted with cases that had paranormal aspects to them and could not be verified using conventional methods?
It's very true. In law enforcement, our job is to collect the facts and evidence and present that to a way that the courts would understand it. So with the paranormal, like you said, goes against a lot of what police officers have been trained to do. When I was writing the book, I came across a lot of individuals that were reluctant to use their real name out of fear of being ridiculed by their colleagues.
In your book, Elliot, you relate a number of diverse paranormal incidents. I would now like to ask you about some of them. Here goes. There is an indigenous people who reside in the forests of the Canadian Northwest Territories who claim that a creature they call Bushman, who seems to me is akin to Bigfoot, has terrorized them and stole their children. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, that is the local belief of the people in the community called Wati, which is in the Northwest Territories, Northern Canada, like you said. They basically believe that the Bushman, who is a Bigfoot type creature, is responsible for children and also people that work in bush camps for going missing.
But to those people who did see it, with the similarities to what we know as Bigfoot, or with their differences, or how did they describe how this Bushman looks?
There was one fellow who was stuck on an island for a couple of days until the RCMP and the Coast Guard could come rescue him. He described it like a typical Bigfoot, over 6 feet tall, with long, furry, matted kind of hair, an awful smell.
For a number of decades, there has been a persistent story related by locals from West Greenwich, Rhode Island, that a woman named Nellie Vaughan, who is buried at a cemetery there, was a vampire.
Yes.
Why was she considered to be a vampire?
The vampire stuff for New England is really interesting. There was another popular girl as well named Mercy Brown in Exeter, Rhode Island, that they thought was a vampire as well. Her story is a little bit more clear though, because her family had tuberculosis and they were, wasn't really understood back then about tuberculosis. I think they called it the lung was its nickname because the doctors just knew it had something to do with your lungs. And, the community started to feel that there was something supernatural going on because all her different family members were coming down with tuberculosis. As with Nellie Vaughan, though, it's not really clear on why people thought she was a vampire. She is buried there, but unfortunately her headstone has been stolen by vandals. So it's not laid out like Mercy Brown, where her headstone's there and people come and they leave gifts and stuff like that. Other people have said that they've seen like an apparition of a lady wearing a dress roaming the cemetery. Other people have reported being pushed or scratched. And they also have reported hearing somebody say they're fine and that they're not a vampire. And
The old courthouse in Halifax, Nova Scotia, is reportedly haunted. And over the
yes,
years, there have been many sightings of ghosts and other spirit activity taking place there. Some people claim it stems from the storage of pieces of the old gallows within the building. Could you go into more detail about that and perhaps relate some of the paranormal experiences people had at the old courthouse?
that was one of my favorite stories to research. A friend of mine that is a sheriff that worked there for 6 or 7 years told me that story. It's the provincial courthouse on Spring Garden Road in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. They used to hang people there out in the back of the courthouse, and there was gallows. And once the wood kind of got through its lifespan of being used as the gallows, they would recycle everything back then. So they would use some of the wood from the gallows to make some amendments to the courthouse. And a lot of the wood from the gallows were used to help rebuild and refurbish the attic. There was a cleaner. He had passed away, unfortunately, by the time I started researching the book, but he had witnessed an apparition himself up in the upstairs attic and really freaked him out. My colleague there, that's the sheriff, said anytime that they do renovations in the building, when they rip up floorboards or tear down walls and stuff, they find old leather shoes hidden throughout the courthouse. And he was told that it was to help ward off evil spirits. The other thing that happened at the courthouse when my buddy was working there, there was 3 sheriffs and 2 cleaners, I believe, and they were each breaking up their tasks for the night. So he decided to go underneath the grand staircase. So when you walk into the Halifax Provincial Courthouse, there's this beautiful grand staircase, and underneath it, there's a passageway that kind of leads down to the cell area and leads to the judge's chambers and all that stuff that's not open to the public. He swiped his card to go in there to take a look. And as he was opening the door, all of a sudden, it felt like somebody had grabbed the door handle and pulled it back from him, slammed the door shut. When that happened, he thought, oh my God, there's a prisoner or somebody on the loose there. He took his swipe card again, swiped it really quick, opened the door, ran into the corner, and it's just this long narrow hallway, and there was absolutely nobody there. So he feels that it was someone that had grabbed the door from him, because just the way that it happened, like he said, it wasn't like a breeze had taken the door or whatever. He literally felt someone grab that door handle and slammed it shut. So I thought that was interesting, because
Yes.
it certainly comes with a lot of history. That, like, the wooden beams, for example, that would have been used for the gallows would have a lot of residual energy left in them. So it would kind of make sense that if they did use parts of that for the renovation of the courthouse, that you may have some strange things happening.
Did you come across stories of demonic possession? And if you did, I would love for you to elaborate on them.
The one demonic possession case that involved law enforcement that I had come across was the one with Maurice Theriault, who's also called Frenchie. And he is based in the Hollywood movies The Conjuring. There's a scene with Ed and Lorraine Warren giving a lecture at the University of Connecticut. They show an exorcism video involving Maurice Theriault. There really is an exorcism video you can find on YouTube with Maurice Theriault. That one was really interesting. The police chief of Warren, Massachusetts, and a state trooper friend of his had witnessed multiple things with Maurice. They went into his house one time, and he was bleeding from his tear ducts, blood. They went into the washroom, found like blood smeared all over the place. They could see a cross appearing through his skin on his back. They were there as well when Ed and Lorraine Warren got called down to assist in trying to investigate this demonic possession.
Stories of ghost ships have fascinated mankind for centuries. You included such a story in your book. Tell me about it.
There's actually lots of ghosts because Nova Scotia's, eastern Atlantic province. So we're surrounded by the ocean. So there's lots of ghost ship stories around here. One I mentioned in the book is actually about the USS Chesapeake, which was involved in having prisoners taken from it and brought to Halifax. And some of them were executed and buried in Halifax. And so every so often, there's a park downtown Halifax called Point Pleasant Park, and people say that when they're walking there in the evening, they've seen the USS Chesapeake appear bay there.
Amongst the various paranormal events you cover, you have included UFO sightings. One such sighting took place in Nova Scotia. Can you go into detail about that sighting?
The book has a lot of UFO sightings in Nova Scotia. Is the big one you're thinking of the Shag Harbor UFO crash?
Please, yes.
Yeah. In October of 1967, there were multiple people from all across Nova Scotia that were reporting strange lights in the sky down in a very, very small community fishing village on the southwestern part of Nova Scotia called Shag Harbor. Multiple teenage witnesses that saw what they thought was an airplane descending at a strange altitude and all of a sudden crash into the ocean. So they called the local RCMP detachment and told them that they thought that a plane just went down in the harbor. So that prompted the police response. They went down to the water. When they got there, they saw a dim yellow light underneath the water. And so they got some of the local fishermen to get their fishing boats ready and take the police out to where this light was. As they were going out into the water, there was this mysterious yellow golden foam on top of the water as well, which fishermen weren't sure what it was. They eventually followed the light for a little bit until it just kind of disappeared. So at that point, the RCMP requested the assistance of the Canadian Coast Guard to come out and help. The Americans also were interested in this as well, since they didn't know what it was and there was no record of an airliner that had gone down. US Navy actually had assisted in the investigation as well. They spent several weeks looking for wreckage or bodies or luggage or anything, and they absolutely could not find anything. There is a second story that kind of branches off from that was investigated by a friend of mine, Chris Stiles. He did a lot of the initial research on Shag Harbor and dug up all the documents from the National Archives. The only difference with this one in Roswell, because they call this Canada's Roswell, is that this one was really well documented by all the government agencies, because you had the RCMP respond, you had the Canadian Coast Guard respond. So a lot of those records were sent to the National Archives and you can request them through, Freedom of Information Act. The second story says that the UFO traveled to Shelburne, which is a neighboring community, where it was met by a second disc. Apparently, witnesses say a second disc had come and gone underwater, did some sort of repair to the first disc, and then both the discs got up from the ocean and took off.
Did you find certain areas experienced more paranormal activity than others? If so, where are these areas located, and why do you think they are so strong in paranormal activity?
I do find the eastern United States and eastern Atlantic Canada seems to have a lot of paranormal activity or a lot of ghost stories reported to it.
Of all the supernatural encounters you researched, did any of them scare you more than the others and cause you to have sleepless nights?
The worst case that I investigated, which wasn't in Supernatural Encounters, it was in my first book that I wrote, which was called Evil in Exeter. This fella here was seen by my co-author, Haley, when she was a teenager. And this entity has always followed her around since she was a little child. When I started talking to her, she knew I was into the paranormal, so she felt comfortable talking to me. And she said, her family has grown up around spirits and they've had lots of strange things happen, and that she's got this entity that follows her. And this entity doesn't seem to like other male figures that are in the house, any boyfriends or anything that she had. The first time that I went down to stay at the house, she's like, "Are you sure you want to stay at the house? Every time someone stays here, crazy stuff happens, this, that." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, investigate lots of hauntings and stuff like that." And it's never bothered me. After staying there a few times, there was some crazy stuff that was happening. Her daughter didn't sleep once for 4 or 5 days straight. The daughter kept hearing scratches on the bedroom wall. I'd go upstairs to take a look. There was nothing there. I even went outside because, I'm a trained police officer. So I'm thinking okay, well, let's make sure the branches aren't scratching on the window, or it's not a squirrel on the windowsill or whatever. There was no trees near the window, no animals out there. Their toys would be manipulated, they talk by themselves. Fire alarms would go off on their own, and they would only turn off individually if sprayed with holy water. Just so many like strange things, and your energy would be drained. Another crazy thing that happened is Haley's iPhone one day. She went downstairs to feed her cat, and when she came back up, she saw that the iPhone light was on, so she thought someone sent her a text. So she went and looked at it, and somebody had spoken into Surrey, and it said, "Hey Surrey, Malik dirty girl," or something like that. It didn't quite make sense what it said. So I'm trying to break it down. I'm like, okay. I was like, well, Matt, like, what's Malik or whatever? Like, that's kind of weird. That's a strange name. And so we started like doing some digging into it. Actually found a demon named Malik, both in the
Wow.
Quran and also in the Bible itself. The demon Malik apparently is this higher ranking demon that is in charge of other demons, and his job is to kind of like stir the pot of hell, and he like tortures souls and stuff like that. And that same day that happened, Haley's son had given her a drawing. It was a stick figure, and he had like all these like swirls around him. So she's like, "Oh, what's this a picture of?" And he said, "Oh, that's the boy I always see in the toy room that likes to play in the fire."
Oh,
And
wow.
and she's like, "What?" And she's like, "Yeah, he's always in the toy room, and he says he likes to play in the fire or whatever." So I drew this picture of him, and that was the same day that the message had shown up on the iPhone, and that we found out that Malik is like the stir of the pot down there. So it was so draining when you were at the house, and just so many things happening, and that was probably the craziest experience.
Should any of my viewers want to order your book, Supernatural Encounters, True Paranormal Accounts from Law Enforcement, or your other book, Evil in Exeter, which is based on a true story involving the haunting of a Rhode Island family, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, there's several different ways you can do it. Amazon.ca and Amazon.com both have both of the books. If you're down in the United States, you can also order it online at Barnes & Noble. If you are in Canada, then you can order it online at Chapters Indigo Coles. In the Halifax Regional Municipality area where I live, all the stores have hard copies of both books there as well.
Elliot Van Dusen, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. Talking with you has been most informative, and I very much look forward to interviewing you again when you author other books.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. To be sure you don't miss any interviews on my free YouTube channel, all you have to do is press the subscribe button on your screen.